and I just want to think about my plumb line wanting to be over there. And my legs will just adjust underneath without me having to do it. Let's watch this in slow motion. Notice that my entire body moves together as a single unit and that Robert is in perfect sync with that unit with no delays as he is pushed back. Also, even though he is pushing hard on me, it is effortless for me. Hello, I'm going to talk about shifting today. Basically getting from one leg to another, both legs on the ground of course, but shifting the weight from one side to another. There's a bunch of different ways to go about this depending upon what kind of martial art you're doing. I do Taiji, I also teach Qigong, in which we do a lot of stance work, and in both of those I teach the same kind of thing. But I'm going to go over a couple different ways, ways that I don't do it and ways that I do it, and later I'm going to bring someone in to demonstrate this along with me so you can see the differences in the power transfer from a couple different methods. So let's talk briefly about a no-no, and that's shifting too much. I'm going to cover this in more depth in a later video on leaning, but basically what I mean is if I'm in a rear-weighted stance here and I want to shift to the front, once I get this far, that's enough. My weight is here, I could turn my hips, and if I turn my hips, I don't want to shift any further. If I were to shift here and then continue, that's too much. If I shift this far and as I turn, I let my torso go that way, and so now this is not a good line, that's gone too much. So whenever you're shifting, make sure you go just enough. If I step out and I shift to this leg, that's enough, my weight's there. I could turn forward, close the door, whatever, but I still haven't overextended my shift either forward or sideways. Same thing if you're shifting into the back leg, that's enough. Any further back, too much, that's bad. Likewise, further this way, no good. All these shifts have to be just enough to where the weight is firmly, squarely, I should say, not necessarily firmly, but squarely on the foot there, not too much one way or another. Okay, so let's get down to the shifting itself. One common way to shift in general would be to push from the back leg to the front leg if I want to shift forward. So I'll be in this stance, I want to go over here, so I'm going to use the foot here and push off the ground to get my weight thrown forward and landing into the front leg here. This method I do not do, and I'll explain why a little bit and demonstrate later. Basically, by pushing off the ground, I set myself up in a kind of brace situation. Anytime that, especially when you have an opponent, if you have a force coming this way and you're pushing against the force, or holding against it, you're bracing, and I don't want to do that. I don't want to brace in the Taiji or the Qigong that I do. So, but very common way is to push off the back leg, throw your center of mass forward at your opponent. It's how you get your mass into your opponent. Basically, with external methods, you're taking your mass, either your whole body mass or the mass of a body part, and trying to make that mass clash into your opponent as quickly as you can. And so pushing off gives you speed, gives you power, and it gets you over there. That's one way to do that. One of the things about that, though, is that doing that method and not having the joints open is that your body becomes stacked in not the way that I like to have it stacked. So what I'm saying is, as I push down here, it pushes this up, it pushes my hip. You know, it's like each bone is stacked on the next bone under it. So it's like a chain reaction. As I push here, it keeps pushing things up my body into where I want to go. And like I said, that's okay, and some people do that, but that's not how I do things. I don't want that kind of sequential happening. I'd rather everything be all at once. Okay, so one way to get around that is by being a little more relaxed, and there are external systems that do that also. They're more relaxed, they don't push from the ground, they kind of root into the ground, they allow, as there's an incoming force, they allow it to go into the ground rather than bracing against them. And they recognize the idea of the body being stacked, and rather than break it down by joint, they focus a bit on the hip area. And as this leg goes, you could see that it pushes my upper body like this. And I could avoid that. I could avoid that from happening by having my hip tucked under or going under as I push. So as I push with my back leg, I could keep the hip under, and now it's as if my upper body doesn't have that kind of push-along effect from here. It kind of joins the upper and lower body to some degree, and it's a kind of simple mechanical way of shifting. In other words, relaxed to a degree where my weight's going down into this leg, and any kind of forces that are coming at me this way or are also going down there, and I'm going to then either push, which some people would still do, or just extend the leg like so, but keep the hip under. So as this extends, the hip goes under and I go forward. And that will actually have a good transfer of power, but it still takes effort. You're still working your muscles quite a bit in this, but it gives you a definite mechanical advantage over your opponent. And in many ways, there's not much wrong with that. It's good mechanics. Another aspect of that in all these shiftings is the path that you take from back here to up there. People call it a walk. So there's if you do an initial dipping down in the shift and then come up slightly so that there's a curve to what you're doing. It doesn't have to be big, it can be a very slight curve. Then what you do is, again, give yourself a mechanical advantage. If someone was standing here and I'm letting the forces go down and the hip comes under and I dip down a bit as my body's going forward at them, it'll push down into their feet. And as their body starts to react upwardly against that, that's around the same time that I start moving up as well. So their up combined with my up will serve to help uproot them. So by traveling in these shallow curves, you give yourself a mechanical advantage. So mechanically speaking, that's not a bad way to shift, but I shift quite a bit differently. So there's two ways that I teach shifting. They're both very similar. One is just making sure it all happens, and the other is after you kind of have a sense of what's happening, that you just kind of do it. But basically, if I'm shifting forward, I'll be on this leg, but I'll be very light on my feet. I don't like to feel a lot of pressure in my feet. There's an idea of being light and agile. So I'm on this foot, and I'm going to use gravity to help get me to my front leg. And by doing that, how that happens, that is by me relaxing even more in this area. Right now, my weight's on this leg well, and if I want it over here, I'm going to relax this area and let this bend slightly. And as I do that, I let this go. So as I do that, my body just starts moving, okay? And if I do that and let it go, and as I'm letting it go, start turning, it'll eventually just kind of run out and kind of fall into that leg. Don't really want to fall into that leg. I want to have a little bit more control. And so I'm going to let go here, and my body weight just kind of starts going over here. And as I'm turning, this starts tilting a bit and placing me better on this leg properly. And it creates that walk effect that I talked about. I'm not even going to talk about closing the door here as I do this. I'm just talking about the shifting. So I kind of open this area, let this go. This starts sending me down. As I turn, I'm going to start shifting this, and it puts me back up onto this leg. It makes a very small curve. And that's a pretty efficient way of doing things. It doesn't take much physical effort at all, and it's actually quite powerful. The other way to do that is very similar in, I'm not going to be thinking about those individual processes. I'm not going to think that I have to let this go to let my body weight pour into this leg and get back on this leg properly and continue. Same thing as if I were going to shift to my back leg from the front leg. I'm going to let this relax more, let this go, and then I kind of, my weight starts going back into this leg, and then as I'm getting, once I get over here and this is tilting, it kind of puts me back on this leg, it closes the door, it creates that small curve from one leg to another. And like I said, that works well, but it could be done kind of all at once, using your intention. If I'm back here on this leg, and one of the things I've learned about doing this, when I'm doing these movements, basically my mind leads the movements and my legs will automatically adjust under my upper body. If my upper and lower body is connected and I'm moving my upper body around, then my legs just kind of do their own thing underneath of it, following the rules of the training that I've done with them. So if I'm over here, then I have a plumb line from the top of my head to the perineum, and basically I want my plumb line to go over there. So in my mind, I just start moving, and my legs will automatically configure and get me over there. Same thing as if I want to shift back, I have my plumb line, I'm thinking from that area, and I just want to go back there, so I go back. And this all configures by itself. I'm going forward, turning, I go back and turn, and my legs just do what they need to do naturally in order to get my torso from one end to the other. And it all works out quite well. Like I said, I'm going to have someone demonstrate a few of these different ways with me so you can see what's going on and the different effects between those. All right? Okay, so now I'm going to illustrate a little bit of this with Robert here. And I'm going to set up in a rear-weighted stance. And I'm going to have Robert, you be in a front-weighted stance. And I want you to push on my hip here. And, you know, basically, you want to keep me from shifting forward. So if I start pushing, make sure you're got me good and strong. If you want to be deeper, you can put that back leg back more and really be in there good, so that if you feel me coming and you want to really be able to stop me, good. I can put my weight in here and push. It's just going to be a struggle. Good. All right, so like I mentioned earlier, you don't want to push up with the foot. If I push here, he can immediately feel it here. If I'm pushing here, he can feel it there, and then he can continue to push, and it becomes a fight, and it's going to be who's stronger, whose center of gravity is lower. I could get a slight mechanical advantage if I recognize that this is pushing up on my hip. I can still push with my leg and let this drop under. So I'm going to push with my leg and let this drop under, and now I'm able to push forward, but I'm still having to push kind of hard. It gives me a center of gravity advantage by dropping this. but I'm still not being as relaxed as possible about this, and I'm still pushing from this back leg. I don't want to push with this back leg. What I want to do is do what I would normally do. I let the yowl flatten, let the head rise, be light on my feet, and I just want to think about my plumb line wanting to be over there. And my legs will just adjust underneath without me having to do, I'm not pushing with my legs, I'm just riding across. Obviously, in the form, there's always turning with the shifts. It makes it even more interesting. So, like if I just stepped out and I landed like this, then there's a turn with the shift, and that turning with the forward motion there causes something that's a little more difficult for Robert to deal with. That aside, it's the idea I want to get across is not to push with the leg at all. So it's not just pushing with the leg and bringing the hip under, because that gives me an advantage, but it's still difficult. It's still work. I'm still using force. It's a more refined force, like Jin. In other words, I'm relaxing, and I'm letting this go down to my leg, but I'm still actually extending my leg and arranging my structure. What I really want to do is not do any of that. I'm not directing this down to my leg. I'm just leading it to emptiness the best that I can. And I'm just being light. I'm just moving my plumb line. It's very, very effortless to do that kind of shifting. And when you add the turns in with it, it makes it even more difficult for your opponent to deal with. I guess that's about it with the shifting. The same thing, real briefly, just like if I was shifting back, let me have you stand back here. If I'm in the front weighted stance and I want to shift to a rear weighted stance, again, I don't want to push. If I'm pushing, this is what's happening, right? If I try to do it mechanically and I extend this leg, drop the hip, I have an advantage that way, and that gets him, but it's still work. What I want to do is, go ahead, is not lead that there, just be empty about this and shift. And I turned a little bit with that one also. This time I'll just, without the turn, go ahead. Okay, so I just think that I want my plumb line back there. I let my intention lead my movement. My upper body starts to move, and my legs just adjust underneath. One last time, just for fun. Again, he could push, and you could push harder if you want. It's okay. I'm just going to keep light with my body. Keep this empty, and just relax, and shift back, and let these just adjust automatically for my body. I'm not pushing with my legs at all. If I do, it may be more powerful, but he'll be able to feel it. He'll feel that coming, and then he'll be able to do something about it if he's smart. And I'd rather not that happen. I like to use as little force as possible, even if it's correct force. I don't want my opponents feeling what's going on. All right, thank you for watching. Bye.